I'm Dr. Nicky Keay, a medical doctor specialising in sports and dance endocrinology, in other words, the hormones. And that's pretty much the topic we're going to be exploring this evening, the influence of hormones and also what happens when those go wrong in the case of REDS, relative energy deficiency in sport. So just to get the ball rolling, I would like to, so you can be doing some thinking about these case studies. So a male runner, 21 years of age, presenting with a low BMI, body mass index, low body fat. He was just cycling but fell off his bike. He's also reporting poor sleep. So if you could think, what might you want to ask him? And if there are any medical people listening, what sort of things would you want to investigate? Female runner, second case study, 26 years of age, presenting with multiple stress fractures. Body weight stable, BMI reasonable at 20. And she was referred to me with no previous eating or disorders. So same sort of questions, what do we think is going on and what to do? So this outlines the sort of things I'm presented with pretty much on a daily basis, athletes and dancers. So sports endocrinology, so the study of hormones, this is one of the hottest topics in my opinion, because it is based on being proactive rather than reactive. Traditionally, sports medicine has focused maybe quite a lot on injuries, the outcome of training errors, and as we'll find out, also endocrine disturbances. But hormones are really super important. Those are the things that drive positive adaptations to training. So if you're an endurance athlete and you do a training session, you expect that this will cause a right shift of your lactate curve. But why does that happen? What's going on? It's actually what's happening internally inside your body. It's the hormones that are driving those positive adaptations to occur. But therefore, if there's an imbalance in your hormones or they're not responding as you would hope, then this is the situation of REDS, which we're going to explore in more detail shortly. And regarding specifically REDS, we're going to discuss the hormone networks, what happens, what gets disrupted, the impact on bone health. And from a medical point of view, of course, coaches will be the first ones to pick up the warning signs, but ultimately then, for me, what do I need to do to confirm the diagnosis and how am I going to help the athlete? And then also I want to bring to your attention some exciting initiatives in this area. So, as I said, hormones are key for driving the positive adaptations to exercise. I mentioned the right shift of the lactate tolerance curve in an endurance athlete. There's also positive effects of exercise mediated via the hormone networks for bone health, body composition. You can read all these important effects, positive adaptations to exercise being driven by the hormone networks. And the good news is that to a certain extent, athletes are in control of their hormones through their three key behaviors of training load, recovery, and nutrition. And if you get a good balance of all of those, then you're obviously in a very good position to perform to your full potential. This is another way of looking at it. So again, those three inputs on your left, training load, nutritional intake, recovery. And if you get those in the green zone, then you're going to support your hormone networks and they're going to be in a good position to drive those positive adaptations that I mentioned. However, of course, it's not as simple as that. If it were, we wouldn't be having this discussion now. If there is insufficient recovery relative to training load, then the athlete can end up in a situation of non-functional overeating and even overtraining. Functional overeating, just to remind you, is you are putting the body under a certain amount of stress and the endocrine networks can cope with that and they drive the positive adaptations. But if they don't have sufficient time or recovery to bring these changes about, that's when the athlete can run into trouble. Another aspect that could become out of balance is nutritional intake. And if the nutritional intake isn't sufficient to cover the demands of the body, then the athlete can end up in a situation of low energy availability. And just to explain that in a little bit more detail, what do I mean by energy availability? So if you consider these as three different athletes, if you focus on the athlete in the center, this athlete is taking on board a certain amount of nutrition, and this is partitioned, prioritized to cover the training demands, the energy demands from training, shown in the blue section at the top. The residual energy, which hasn't been used for covering training, is what's known as energy availability. And you can see for this athlete, that's in the green, the sufficient energy to maintain health, to keep all the bodily, basic, fundamental physiological processes ticking over. And please note that that actually is quite a large chunk of our energy intake. Even if we were to lie in bed all day, then obviously, we're warm-blooded mammals. We need a lot of energy just to stay alive effectively. If we now consider the athlete on your right, you can see that this athlete is consuming the same amount of food, same amount of energy as the athlete in the center, yet their training demands, energy training demands in blue, are much higher. This could be because the athlete has gone on a training camp, or it's just a block of high training load. And this results in going into the red, low energy availability, shown in red. If you now look at the athlete on your left, you will see that this athlete has intentionally reduced their energy intake in the belief that maybe this will help with their performance by being of lighter weight. But you can see the result is that they are now in low energy availability, shown in red in that diagram. So there are various ways that the athlete can end up in low energy availability, either unintentionally, simply because they're just training a lot, or it's physically difficult to get in the nutrition, if there are long training sessions, etc., or there could be an intentional aspect to this. But this was first described, by the way, in female athletes, the female athlete trial, which I'm sure that you will have heard of, originally actually described in female distance runners, as you can see, by Barbara Drinkwater, who observed that those female athletes with a higher training load were more likely to end up in a low energy availability state. And this had an effect on disruption of menstrual cycles. Amenorrhea means no cycles, no periods, and reduced bone density. As you can see from that diagram underneath, it's a sort of a sliding scale. It's not an all or nothing thing. There can be variations on the theme, that clinical spectrum. And actually, there are subtleties to this. However, the problem, or the thing about the female athlete triad, was that it was excluding half the population, in other words, the male athlete. And also, it is now recognized that it affects many more body systems, not just bone health and menstrual function, albeit those are very important ones. As you can see from this diagram from the IOC consensus statement, many other systems are impacted. And also another thing just to point out, the psychological aspect, there's a reversible arrow on that, because if you are a successful athlete, you will, of course, be driven, determined, slightly obsessive, perfectionist, all those character traits, which can in turn lead you into a situation where you might become restricting, in a position of restricting your nutrition and controlling what you eat. And so therefore you can see that that's why it's a reversible arrow cause and effect, because once you end up in that situation of low energy availability, it's difficult to make really rational decisions. And I also want to mention the impact of social media. In a recent study of dancers, I found that this, and I'm sure it's no different in sports, there is now a big impact of social media on the way that we eat and appear. And by the way, just as an example of an early male athlete that suffered with RED-S, this is Chris Boardman, who describes when he converted from track cycling to road cycling, how he intentionally went about becoming lightweight, and actually he had to retire in his early 30s with osteoporosis. So, it does affect men as well. And these are the two consequences of being in lower energy availability described in the REDS clinical model. So there are the health effects that I mentioned, but also the performance effects. And this is key, because if you're an athlete, frankly, it's all about, of course, you want to focus on your performance. And this is something that, of course, the female athlete triad did not address or mention, that there are potential adverse effects on performance. And here are some examples shown in the diagram, and here are some examples from studies showing, demonstrating this performance effect. So in female athletes with no periods, there's evidence of decreased neuromuscular skills, so reaction time, peak power production, etc. Or female swimmers who were amenorrheic, no periods, failed to improve their 400-meter swim time. And also in a recent study I did with male cyclists, there was a decrease in FTP functional threshold power over 60 minutes and decrease in the race points, British cycling race points that were won. And also notice that there's also evidence that this phenomenon of REDS is not limited to endurance sports. It's been shown to happen in other sports, of course, aesthetic sports, and dancers, which is the group I'm involved in at the minute. So this is often this is a diagram that I made, which I often show to athletes and dancers to sort of visually demonstrate what's happening. If you're in a situation of low energy availability, you simply cannot attain your full potential. And why? Because I said that hormones drive these adaptive changes, and everything is down-regulated in the body if you're in low energy availability. So this is a nice visual I show them, because many athletes will turn around and say, I'm doing absolutely fine, I've just had a very good race, very good performance, I'm sure you're wrong, there's nothing wrong with me. It's true, you might get to 1 or 2 good results, but it's not sustainable in the long term, which is really what we're talking about. We want these athletes to perform to their best for as long as possible. So just a summary of where we are with REDS. Really, I think to date, we've only dealt with the tip of the iceberg. So the tip of the iceberg, sometimes the perception is that REDS is only about food intake. It only occurs if you've got an eating disorder, and it only occurs or more frequent or pretty much exclusively to women. But underneath the surface, as I've just alluded to, of course, men are affected. It affects many systems and can affect all ages, actually, and all levels of exercise, from recreational to elite. And the fundamental problem is this imbalance in training load and nutrition. And it can manifest itself as the person being dependent on exercise get very, very anxious, upset if they have to miss training, and almost force themselves through illness and injury. And they might not necessarily have an eating disorder, but certainly disordered or restrictive eating patterns. And I'm afraid as doctors, we're not doing that well. This was a survey by my colleague Keay in the States, and out of general medical doctors, GPs here in the UK, for example, only a minority actually could recognize or aware of the female athlete triad. And although the IOC themselves made this statement, produced the consensus statement, unfortunately, again, there aren't many systematic programs to support the athletes across the sports federations.